Donald Trump, man, it is like he has had one piece of bad news after another. Legally, this was Letitia James, New York Attorney General, on Friday.
Today we prove that no one is above the law, no matter how rich, powerful. Donald Trump falsely, knowingly inflated his net worth by billions of dollars to unjustly enrich himself, his family, and to cheat the system.
Yeah, so that is Letitia James. And, of course, Friday we did hear about President Trump's fine of around $450 million for supposedly inflating the value of his properties. Again, that's New York Attorney General Letitia James following former President Trump's announcement that he had been now being ordered to pay $450 million. Now, Hans von Spakovsky is joining us from the Heritage Foundation. Hans, always great to have you with us. And were you surprised at this Judge Engron's decision and the amount of the fine? $450 million when they add in the interest. What were your thoughts on this?
Oh, no, I'm not surprised at all. My surprise was that it wasn't more, since Letitia James had actually increased her demand that it be in the $700 million range. Remember, this judge had said that the former president was guilty before the trial started.
Yep.
Before the trial started, he found him guilty. And remember, under this terrible, really horrible law, you're not entitled to a jury trial, which to me is a basic violation of the Seventh Amendment. But notice what was not in Letitia James's statement. She said he cheated the system. Nowhere did she say that he had cheated any victims, because there were no victims. All the banks and others from whom the Trump organization borrowed money, every single one of them was paid back, and they all made a profit. Not a single one of them asked for this lawsuit. What they did is they used this really bad law, one that doesn't require any actual fraud in that someone lost money or lost property against someone they consider to be the political opposition. And that's what this was. This is the kind of law, and this is the kind of lawsuit you see in third world countries in places like Venezuela.
Yep.
When the political party in power goes after the opposition. And think about the fact that Letitia James, the Attorney General, before she was Attorney General, before she had any opportunity whatsoever to examine or any evidence, said, I'm going to get Donald Trump. Now, what does that tell you about this case? She
ran. That was her big platform, is she was going to get Donald Trump. I've played, part of her commercials and the debates and the speeches that she's given when she was running. It's amazing. And I guess part of the question I would have for you, Hans von Spakovsky, joining us from the Heritage Foundation on Donald Trump's legal issues here, certainly of late. There were no, as you just said, there is no real victims in this case. And
right.
when banks are working with people to give these loans, I mean, they have their own processes in place to verify the property values. And so the
Correct.
banks did their due diligence on this.
Right, and they were satisfied with it. And look, the judge ignored, and you could tell that, again, this judge is just as biased as Letitia James based on statements that he made before he even got the case. He's a typical Manhattan, very liberal ideologue.
Yeah.
Look, you had officials down in the city where Mar-a-Lago is in Florida publicly disputing the low values this judge said should have been given to Mar-a-Lago. You had a professor from New York University disputing what the judge was saying. Yet this judge, who is not a real estate expert, basically was saying, well, my opinion of this is what's going to count. That just, again, shows you what a kangaroo court this was. And, I don't think... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let me ask you, Hans, because you and I can talk all day long on this. And the question, though, is that this is one judge and one attorney general, and the two of them have destroyed Donald Trump's life when it's clear that they were biased against Donald Trump. The statements from both are obvious here. And so now I guess the question is, what's next for President Trump? What are his options? I mean, clearly he can, I believe, probably afford $450 million, but I mean, clearly this is not fair.
No, well, you got to appeal it. The problem is look, the kind of judges like this one infest the entire New York judicial system. And I am not sure any court of appeals that had rational people on it would not only throw out this case, they would throw out this particular law as an unconstitutional abuse of due process. But I don't trust that the state court system will do that. And so, yeah, he's got to appeal. But look, he may be stuck because of this. I'll tell you what ought to happen, though, besides the appeal that he's obviously going to file, is that, listen, if I was the head CEO on the board of any company producing any kind of products or services, I would not do business in New York.
Actually, yeah, there's a big article. Dangerous. Yeah, there's a big article today, Hans, out there where the fear is because, New York doesn't have enough problems. Now they're talking about how businesses are going to be fleeing New York, not because of the crime or the high taxes or all of the illegal aliens and migrants that are flooding into New York, but because of this. Because if you've got judges like Engoron and Letitia James, and they get, some sort of a hair up there, they can go after anybody. If they did this to Trump, they can do this to anybody. And so you're right. This is going to be another reason for these companies to flee New York. By the way, Hans, I'm not sure if you heard the story out there this morning. Truckers for Trump. You've got a bunch of truck drivers that are going to refuse to go to New York because they feel like, and it's certainly true, that Donald Trump is being treated unfairly. But it sounds like you've got all of these different judges. How high up would this possibly go? I mean, I don't know the legal process by which this plays out or how this plays out.
Well, remember, this is a state court judge, so it's going to have to get appealed up through the New York court system up to what is the New York equivalent of their state Supreme Court. If he loses there, then he could appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court if he can say that what the state has done in some way violates the U.S. Constitution. That's what's happened with the other case that we're waiting a decision on. Remember, the Colorado State Supreme Court, disqualifying Trump from the ballot. That was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court because Trump said, and I think he's right, that what the Colorado court did has violated the U.S. Constitution. I think his argument to the U.S. Supreme Court would be along the lines of what I've talked about, which is, hey, this is a statute that violates what are called substantive due process rights. You're fined hundreds of millions of dollars and you don't have a right to a jury?
Yeah, it's one guy.
That doesn't work under the U.S. Constitution. Under the U.S. Constitution, if it's more than $20, you get a jury trial.
Well, and when you talk about the amount this is and also how it's just so vindictive in nature, she went after her kids as well. He cannot apply for any bank loans for 3 years. Trump does say he'll go ahead and appeal, but this is going to be a fascinating case to watch. And then, of course, last week, also talking about the case involving Stormy Daniels continues. That begins March 25th. And so perhaps, Hans, that means a decision by Election Day in November. How vulnerable is Donald Trump here for, as they say, they accuse him of falsifying business records? What are his chances in this case? We know the judge truly doesn't like Donald Trump in the Stormy Daniels case. He's donated money to Democrats. His daughter apparently worked for the Biden-Harris campaign. I mean, how vulnerable is the Trump in the Stormy Daniels case?
He's vulnerable in that case because of the bias of the judge and the bias of the DA, Alvin Bragg, and where it's being held. he's not vulnerable because of the facts or the law. This is an even more bogus prosecution than the one we're talking about. Alvin Bragg is claiming that Donald Trump disguised in his business records a violation of federal law. So the whole case hinges on a supposed violation of federal campaign finance law. What Alvin Bragg claims to be a violation of federal law isn't a violation of federal law. And folks don't have to take my opinion on this, even though I'm a former commissioner on the Federal Election Commission. If this were a violation of federal campaign law, the Federal Election Commission, where I used to serve as a commissioner, and or the U.S. Justice Department would have investigated and prosecuted him for it. They did not do it. And the FEC is an independent agency. You know, it wasn't under Trump's control when he was president. And the FEC concluded there was no violation of federal law. So there's no basis for what Alvin Bragg is doing.
Does it matter that their star witnesses are Michael Cohen, a guy who's, lied to Congress, convicted of that, and Stormy Daniels, a porn star? And I mean, she's not exactly a beacon of virtue. So, I mean, does that matter to anybody in this case?
Well, it doesn't in New York because they're out to get Trump. If they were someplace where rational people were on the jury, it would. And the other thing, too, for everybody to keep in mind is, what is he being accused of? The fact that when they paid off Stormy Daniels, the settlement agreement had a confidentiality provision in it. That's standard. That is a standard provision in settlement agreements everywhere. There's probably 100 celebrities in Hollywood who have made settlements like this that we don't know about. Why? Because they had a confidentiality provision in it. And yet that's what he's being prosecuted
for. Well, they can't even prove that the encounter happened.
Exactly. This was a nuisance settlement. Look, The amount of money she got was peanuts. And that's because it was what's called a nuisance settlement. And all lawyers know about those. If what she said had really happened, she wouldn't have settled for a measly amount of money. She would have gone to trial and tried to get millions of dollars. Again, this is just a totally bogus criminal prosecution.
Well, Hans, it's going to be interesting. Thank you very much for joining us here on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. I always appreciate your analysis. Hans von Spakovsky from the Heritage Foundation. I didn't even get to the E. Jean Carroll situation. I didn't get to the federal prosecution of Donald Trump. I mean, it just goes on and on and on with the former president. By the way, I do love this. Truckers for Trump. This is the headline this is last night. Everybody's asking me if I know about this. I do, thank you. Truckers for Trump to boycott driving to New York City after the $355 million, actually like $450 million fraud ruling. They're in New York, and they're just saying that they're not going to drive to the city. And I understand that. They say a group of truck drivers who support Donald Trump have announced they will not be driving to New York City as a means of expressing their disappointment with the civil fraud judgment that fined Donald Trump more than $350 million last week. They added in the interest before the ruling. That makes it $450 million. So there you go. Now, will that matter to the folks there in New York? Probably not. But, we'll have to wait and see where this all plays out. I cannot imagine how powerless Donald Trump must feel right now. And there's GoFundMe accounts now. Did you see this in the news this morning? There's GoFundMe accounts now where people are trying to help Donald Trump pay these judgments off, the lawyer fees and everything else. It is just absolutely awful.